hopefully we have a lot of exciting information to share today. I think the SNAP-Ed webinar, along with what Abigail's going to share today, is going to lead us into some really good discussion. So I guess let's get started and just go around the room and on the phone. Maybe we can start on the phone, since usually we start in the room, and just let us know your name, your organization, and how about what you wanted to be when you grew, what you want to be now when you grow up, because we're always growing up. So my name's Maddie. I am from the American Heart Association. I'm the chair of this work group. And when I grow up, I want to be an outdoor guide, either like a ski guide or a rock climbing guide for kids. Oh, and we'll go to the phone next. So Kenyatta, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Kenyatta Jackson. I'm with my daughter at her 2-month checkup today, so I'm sorry I can't be there in person to officially meet all of you. I've sent in about a year ago and have been getting emails that I'm pregnant, so I'm happy to just be joining and picking up. I am a member of Black Child Development Institute Denver chapter, and then as I said, I own a traveling yoga studio. And
so cool.
When I grow up, I just want to go back and play with the kids. I just want to go be at a playground or a park or something and have fun in the water.
Awesome. Vinny, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Vinny Cervantes with Denver Alliance for Street Health Response. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a teacher, and that's probably still something I want to do.
Great. 303-827-4363. That is your new identity, apparently.
Thank you so much. This is Curtis Robbins with Kaiser Permanente. And sorry, I have to call in as well. I have missed the last few monthly meetings, but hopefully I can get there in person eventually. I am reading Harry Potter with my youngest son, and so when I grow up, I want to write like J.K. Rowling and capture young people's imaginations.
Awesome. And then the last person we have on the phone, 720-982-182. God, my eyes are getting bad.
Hi, it's Leslie from Project Angel Heart, and when I grow up, I want to be Beyonce.
That's awesome. Okay, I will turn it Erin. Do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, make sure to turn the microphone.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone in the room and on the phone. I'm Erin Ulrich. I'm the new Blueprint to End Hunger Implementation Director, so I'm excited to be here. This is the last work group that I have not yet been to, so I think you guys met right before I started, so I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. And when I grow up, it would probably be the right thing to say I want to be the implementation director. But I'm not going to say that. I want to retire on a beach in Costa Rica and run a bed and breakfast. But this job is great.
Hello, this is Andrew Stricker. I'm with Trailhead Institute, and I guess I want to be a wealthy philanthropist.
Hey, this is Kevin Werner with Trailhead Institute, and when I was growing up, I wanted to be a pilot.
Are we saying what we wanted to do
What
when
you
we
want
were
to
younger?
be when you grow up.
What you want to do when you grow up?
Oh. Hi, this is Tawana Henderson from Beyond the Classroom. And what I want to be when I grow up is, it's kind of similar to what you said. I just, hang out on the beach and chill.
Hello, this is Jacqueline Linson with the Colorado Health Foundation, and when I was a little girl, I lived in Bertha, Colorado, so I always wanted to grow up and be a farmer, because there was farmers all around us, but we didn't have farm, we just had regular cows.
Hi everyone, Max Young, and when I was a little girl, and I still want to do this, is be a forest ranger in a state park, educating kids. So that was my goal.
Hi, Abigail Tessner with CDPHE. And when I grow up, I want to travel all around the world and figure out how to finance that.
This is Ellie Eger with Hunger Free Colorado, and I think when I grow up, I just want to be like an artist that can paint and have my potter's wheel and just sculpt and have fun.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rothberg, and I'm the communications specialist for Hunger Free Colorado. And this is good. Yeah, I want to do something with art and activism.
Thank you. I'm Kelly Wagner with Get Ahead Colorado, a program with the Piton Foundation. I joined you all by phone last time, so I'm glad to be here in person to meet you all. Let's see, much like many other people, I'd like to be independently wealthy when I grow up, and I would take that wealth and travel, and then probably start a program for kids in my community so they could be exposed to some opportunities that they might not have.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Banyan. I'm one of the folks helping with the blueprint. I think I grew up too quickly, so I would just like to grow down.
I'm Michelle Ames. I provide communication support to the blueprint and individual work groups where needed. And wow, my head is completely blank. I guess when I grow up, I'd like to be able to say I'm the best version of myself. Still working on that, and it's only been almost 50 years now, but eventually I'm getting there.
Awesome. Well, I hope we all succeed in our goals. Need to give you some insight and inspiration, guys. So today we are talking about our goal to create a long-term statewide public and political will-building campaign. And obviously this is a long process, and I think it's somewhat new to all of us, and I think it's also new to the blueprint. So we're working through it, so I'm just asking for your patience in all of this. But I think what is really helpful is that we've been doing a lot of research and on all the examples of what's existing, examples of processes and best practices. And today we are going to hear from Abigail about what's worked at CDPHE. And then we're going to hear from some of the research we've done with No Kid Hungry, and start that process and discussing sort of what our target audience wants to be, what our goals are and actions that we're hoping for, and start working through that. Just as a reminder, there are kind of two efforts that we're working on in this work group at the time, and that's our kind of longer term one. Next week, we are also having, is it next week? On the 25th, put it that way. We are also having a subcommittee meeting to start looking at SNAP and WIC collateral that we know right now is not necessarily existing in Colorado, and some of the low-hanging fruit of how we can start changing that on a shorter term. So this is very much a long-term project, and so just wanted to throw that out there. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Abigail. Thank you so much for being here. Excited to hear from you. Do you want me to click, or do you want to?
Up to you. I can pass you the keyboard if you'd like.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Abigail Kestner. I'm the Communications and Marketing Lead Strategist at the Prevention Services Division at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I know, right? I did not come up with the title. But I'll probably talk for about 15 minutes just about some of the work that we've done at CDPHE, somewhat related to public will building campaigns, but also social marketing campaigns. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of what we've done to focus and make it successful. My presentation is much less creative driven than I think the presentation we heard from Max. This is much more about kind of the strategy and the tactics we use behind the campaigns. But feel free to stop at any point for questions. I'm happy to chat. So I think the most important thing that we've all done with all of our campaigns, I would say both at CDPHE, and then I used to be a communications consultant at a communications firm in Denver called SC2, and worked on a lot of social marketing campaigns there, behavior change campaigns there. And the really important thing I think we do at the very beginning of the project is to always really very clearly define who your audience is and what you want them to do. And I think Max and I were just chatting in the hall after her presentation. I mean, I think that's the thing that I was really excited to see in this, the presentation previously, is that the materials that they presented, the ad campaign that they have is super, super focused. And I think that a lot of times, especially with the work that we do and the passion behind all of the stuff that we do, we really want to be able to change things. And sometimes that means we get really, really big and really, really ambitious. And sometimes that's not always successful. So the more that we can really focus on a lot of these efforts, we found that to be the most successful. So some of the things that we've done at the health department, you know, some examples that we have is, for example, for our tobacco campaigns, we want to get people to quit smoking. But instead of talking to all smokers, we really, really target that audience so that the tactics are successful, that we're being really efficient with our resources, that the messages are really reaching them. So for example, we'll do ad campaigns for low socioeconomic status adults, and we really want them to start thinking about considering quitting, not even making the quit attempt. So the tactics and the creative is going to be really targeted to that specific audience. So we really want to identify our goal, and I would say in a lot of all of our public will building campaigns or social marketing campaigns, we're really focused on how the campaign can support the programmatic efforts in the community. So we know that all of these messages that are out there in the world are going to be more successful if there are efforts in the community that are kind of supporting that and building that up. So the SNAP Ed campaign, because there are these other resources, because people are going to these nutrition education classes, that helps the campaign be successful. So that's some of the things that we look at with some of our campaigns from the health department, is how the campaigns work in conjunction with a lot of the programmatic efforts, so that there's just this kind of really consistent message out of there from a lot of different places to encourage people to change their behavior. So, I mean, those of you in this room, I'm sure, are very familiar with the term SMART, but it's worth repeating, because I think, again, a lot of times we can get very ambitious and very, and try to just kind of do too much with our campaigns. So just making sure that as we talk about who our audience is and what we want them to do, that those goals that we're defining are really SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and that, I think, has a lot to do with budget as well. So as we start thinking through this space, what the budget looks like, and timely. And so that's just something that I'm sure people are familiar with, but I thought it's good as a discussion. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the process that we go through. Again, for those of you on the phone who are on the previous call, and for those of you in the room who are on the previous call, this looks familiar. It's the same process that Rescue used, I think, with the other campaign. But typically when we put social marketing campaigns together, we kind of go through a very similar process for all of our campaigns, regardless of the audience, regardless of the goal. Everything is based on discovery and research, which we've done, I think, a lot of the foundational stuff here already related to our topic that we're talking about. But this also includes audience research. So once you define the audience and what you want them to do, we usually do a lot of surveys and focus groups with the audience to really understand their motivation and what's going to really encourage them to change their behavior. So when we talk about kind of where people are on the spectrum, how willing are they to change? Where are they on that spectrum? And then what's it going to take for them to take that extra step? From that research, that's when we develop what we call our creative. So we develop our ads. What does it look like? What are the colors that we use? What's the tone? Are we going to use illustration? Are we going to use photography? And what resonates with them? And then usually we develop about 2 or 3 creative concepts, and then we usually test them with the audience. So we show it to them and we say, how do you feel about this? Is this going to motivate you to change? If not, how can we adjust it to make it work better? And then we take those ads, we turn them into all of the different formats they need. So in the previous campaign, they talked about digital ads for websites. They talked about radio ads, video spots that can be on TV or online. We kind of version them all out, and then we launch the campaign. And then we have our campaign evaluation. So that can look very different depending on budget. Some of our budgets, we have a really big budget, and we're able to actually do kind of pre and post surveys. So we can say, how did people feel before the ads were running?
The ads then ran, and then we test, how did you feel after the ads run? Did you see these ads, and did you change your behavior? Did you change your opinion? But some of our campaigns, we don't have those sort of metrics. So we look at Google Analytics, or if we have ad campaigns that are asking people to call a phone number, we see how many phone calls we got when the ads were on. And so those are good indicators, and we kind of just can do what we can within the budget. And then I think, as we were talking, I think before, it's really also, with the evaluation part, it's making sure that we are working with the programs to really identify what metrics that they want and how these campaigns can support that work. So it's a really, I would say it's a very collaborative process between kind of the marketing and communication staff and the program staff. Oops, I went too far. So I wanted to talk about one of the campaigns that we've been running over the last year, just to give you a sense of kind of our budget numbers and why we have the budget numbers the way that we do. So we've been running a campaign over the last year to address vaping in Colorado. And for those of you who aren't kind of tapped into this, Colorado is actually #1 in the nation for youth vape use. We are using more vape products, youth are using more vape products in Colorado than in any other state in the country. The asterisk is, of those that are, I think it's like 36 actually have the reporting.
How do you figure that out? I've always wondered that.
There are a couple of different surveys that go out. We run the Healthy Kids Colorado survey. The Healthy Kids Colorado survey is like a Colorado version of a national survey called YRBS, which is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And so we basically ask the same questions, and then they compare it. YRBS is it's not run in all 50 states, but of the states where we pull the data from, Colorado is #1. And our Healthy Kids Colorado survey, we run at the health department every 2 years. And it asks everything. It asks about substance use, mental health, healthy eating, active living. There's a lot of really awesome data in there with middle school and high school students. So because of this problem that we were seeing with youth vaping in Colorado, we decided to run a behavior change campaign to try to encourage youth to not vape. And then we also ran kind of an accompanying campaign to parents and other trusted adults. So it was an ad campaign targeted to parents of youth age probably 12 to 18, but mostly towards the 12 to 13, 14 range, because unfortunately that's where most youth are starting to use substances. And we did that because from our Healthy Kids Colorado survey, we actually know that parents and other trusted adults are a really big influence on youth lives. And if they have parents that they can talk to, if they have parents who set rules, if they have parents who know where they're going when they're not at home and who they're with, they're actually less likely to use substances. So we wanted to make sure that we were talking to both audiences in order to change behavior. So the youth audience in Colorado is about a population of $170,000. Our budget for this campaign is about $300,000. The reason it's so much lower is, if you look at the numbers across the screen, not only is the population smaller, but the tactics that we use to reach youth are a lot more affordable. So when we run our youth campaign, we're really doing a lot of digital tactics. We're doing a lot of ads on websites, social media channels. We've had a lot of success on game apps on mobile phones. So youth have to click on the ad and they get credits on their games. And if they do that, then they see our ad. It's super, super successful. And then for adults, the population's a little bit bigger and a lot of our tactics are a little bit more expensive. So when we do our adult campaigns, it usually includes a lot more mass media. So that means TV ads, it means radio ads. We might have what we call out of home. So those are billboards, bus ads, things out in the community. As a point of comparison, one of our billboards that we run, or have run in the past, we're not running it right now, it costs $25,000 to run a billboard on I-70 in Sheridan for 2 months. So some billboards are $5,000 for 2 months, but depending on the high traffic areas, it can be pretty expensive. So those are just some of the things we take into consideration. How much do we need kind of that awareness spread throughout the community? And that's kind of how we set our budgets, and we work with media buyers who make recommendations and can try to negotiate some pretty good prices for us.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Do those numbers include message testing, audience testing?
This is just the media buy.
Oh, just media buy, okay.
Yep. So the message testing, the pre and post evaluation, the creative development is all on top of this $1 million cost.
Thank you.
Yep, this is just the cost for advertising. I know, right?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. And so I would say, you know, our campaigns, as I said, I kind of walked through a couple of the tactics that we use, a lot of the different digital tactics that we've used. We've used a lot, we've used some influencer marketing as well, if anyone's familiar with that term. There, I think, are examples of influencer marketing that has gone sadly awry and makes us sorry for society. And then we use influencer marketing. I don't know if anyone's seen the news about the Chernobyl event. Look it up afterwards. Yeah. In any case, but we have had some really positive experiences with some influencers. So we'll basically pay people who have a lot of followers on social media, and we'll ask them to deliver a message on their behalf. So it's very authentic and engaging. And that's proven to be pretty successful with some of our tactics.
Is that more successful for adults or for kids?
It can be both, and a lot of it depends on the message. We've used it for both adults and for youth. And then we've also had, not for this vaping campaign, but for some of our other social marketing campaigns, we have tried out a couple of other guerrilla tactics, if you will. I think not last meeting, but the meeting before, when we talked about the Go Wild, you know, when they're putting these TPs in these play centers in the middle of parks and playgrounds. That's a tactic, I think, that's been pretty successful for that campaign. For one of our smoking campaigns, we actually rented a space at the Westward Music Festival, and so this was one of our campaigns to try to get young adult smokers to quit smoking. So we created this space at the Westward Music Festival. It was a VIP space, prime seating for them to see the music, but it was a totally smoke-free environment. We had all of these kind of interactive things, masks that they could put on and take selfies and hashtags and kind of this whole experience, and that ended up being a pretty successful engagement tactic for one of our campaigns. I think there was a question, and I don't know how to get to that through the keyboard. Look, there was. That's okay.
Why is it so much cheaper for youth advertising?
So the reason it is a lot cheaper for youth advertising, I think they're twofold. One is because the audience is a little bit smaller. And I would say because our youth campaigns are typically digital, we're not running TV ads for kids. We're not running billboards with our youth audience in mind. TV, radio, billboards can be pretty expensive, but digital is a lot cheaper. So we have digital tactics for adult campaign too. So basically our youth campaign is mostly digital. Our adult campaign is digital plus TV plus billboards and things like that. So it makes it a little bit more expensive. So some of the results of the campaign, you know, we were lucky to be able to have money set aside to be able to really measure the impact of the campaign and if it changed opinion and behavior. We found that people who saw the campaign were more likely to believe that youth vaping is an issue. And so this was a really big deal because vaping is so new. There's a lot of questions about whether vaping is even bad for you or not. And so we really wanted people to question it, especially question it related to youth use. And then people were also more likely to know where to go to get reliable information about vaping. So as the State Health Department, we wanted them to trust our resources that we have rather than a lot of the marketing that's also going out in the community from the vape industry. Also, as a result of our campaign, 89% of the people who saw the campaign planned to talk to their kids about vaping, which again was one of the metrics we really wanted to hit, so that was a really good thing. And then our average time on site was 1:36, which doesn't seem like a long time, but it's actually like pretty good in terms of website visits. So we had people coming to the site and spending a lot of time to get that information so that they could have that information to talk with their youth about not vaping.
Do you guys have a specific website for this in addition to all the other meetings?
Yeah, so much like Max was talking about, for almost all of our behavior change campaigns, we have campaign websites that tie specifically to that issue. So we don't just have like one website that deals with, well, we do, in essence, we have one, we don't have one website just for tobacco. So we have a kind of a youth website that's very youth focused. When you get there, a lot of the content there looks like the ads that they've seen on their mobile phones, and so it all really connects. But yeah, the website is very specific to this campaign. Yeah.
So for your, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So for the parents, it's more of an, for the parents, it's more of an awareness campaign so that they could talk to their kids about it, right?
A little bit of, I would say it's a little of awareness, and it's a little bit of a behavior change campaign too. They're not talking to their youth, so we want them to be aware that they should, and then we want them to change their behavior to actually have those conversations.
Okay, I was going to get clear what the behavior you wanted from.
So it's to have those conversations. Yep. So I wanted to talk a little bit about another behavior change campaign that we're working on right now related to tobacco, because I feel like there's a lot, we're kind of in a lot of the same process that we're at the tobacco program that we are in this room right now. So one of the things that we're working on is how do we get people to support anti-tobacco policies? How do we get them to, not from the State Health Department, of course, but can we get support in the community to support taxes? Because we know taxes are the #1 way that people reduce their tobacco use. How do we support policies that are really going to influence behavior change among smokers and non-smokers? So our short-term goal is kind of a baby step, right? How do we change the opinions about how dangerous secondhand smoke is? And again, our audience is really focused. It's not all smokers. We kind of segmented our audience between kind of 3 groups, and they kind of do this in political campaigns as well. But you have your people who are never going to change their opinion. You have your people who are totally on board with your message, and they're like going to support you no matter what. And then you have those persuadable people in the middle who don't really know, but you want to push them to your side. So this was actually a result of the tobacco team really wanted a campaign just to quote unquote, make a general audience care about tobacco. Super, super big goal, super generic. And while it's a worthy goal, there were a lot of potential issues with that. Generally, people don't care about things unless they have a good reason to, or unless they can actually do something to affect change. So if we keep it really broad, it can really lead to alienating some audiences who aren't sympathetic to the issue, while neglecting audiences that may be persuaded to take action. So it was that initial goal of just to make general audiences care about tobacco was too broad to build a campaign around. So we had to really drill down to be specific and actionable for a defined audience, even if it was an audience that we normally talk to, like tobacco users. So through audience research, we discovered that Coloradans are not as likely as we expected to know that secondhand smoke was bad for them. And we also saw that in other states who have done a lot of the tobacco control work, changing attitudes around secondhand smoke led to a lot of really beneficial policy changes. It could include, and not policy changes too. So in states that focused on this, they found that people were quitting smoking. They found that people in the community were supporting different policy changes at more of like a systems level. But then they also found that changing attitudes about secondhand smoke even resulted in personal policies. So people were more likely to say, I don't want people smoking in my home or in my car, which would set more social norms for kids and then eventually reduce the smoking rates. So the goal really shifted from that real general audience to really focusing down to change how people in Colorado care about secondhand smoke specifically. So we really kind of focused where we were.
Abigail, really quick.
Yeah.
So your initial goal was changing behavior with vaping, and then was this sort of, no.
Sorry, I might have been confusing. The vaping was a separate campaign.
Okay, sorry.
And we're still running the vaping campaign. So this is just another example, I think, of another campaign that we're working on from CDP.
Okay, just related to
Yep.
something. I apologize.
Just related. That's okay. Sorry, it was a little confusing. Yeah, so this is just separate efforts that we have. The initial goal was to just make a general audience care about tobacco. And through our research, we helped the program really focus what the goal of the campaign was. So we really used kind of that audience research to make sure that we were linking attitudes and opinions on secondhand smoke. And then what this looks like in our campaign is we're able to actually translate attitudes and behaviors into demographic and psychographic targeting, so that gets like super jargony, but we can basically make our ads fit with the type of people that we're trying to reach based on our research, which is really cool. So the long-term goal is, as we're looking for this work, you know, we really do want to change opinions about secondhand smoke, but down the road, we're really looking at, will it affect coalition support for local tobacco control policies? We have a lot of local grantees and communities trying to change local policies, and so does this campaign impact that? Will we see increased quit attempts? Will we see social norm shifts among, you know, individuals who are changing smoking policies in their homes or cars or things like that? So that, I think, is just an example of, we had this like really kind of broad idea, and how do we kind of focus it, and where are we going next? So right now we're in the stage of developing the campaign and then testing it with the audiences. We're actually doing focus group testing next week, and the campaign probably won't launch until next fall. Any questions about that? I feel like that's a lot of content.
For one slide, it's a lot of content.
Yeah, well, I try to get, yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah. So I think, you know, so as I said, I feel like that's a similar place to kind of where we are in this room and some of the conversations that we've been having, that we have these kind of big ideas, we have these big goals, but if we can really kind of narrow in on the audience and kind of define who that is and what we want them to do, I think that we can really move a long way into this kind of, how do we define this public will building campaign for this group? So let's see. I think that's where I want to stop, unless you want to talk any more about any other questions we have, or talk through this slide, or turn it over to Michelle.
I have one question for you.
Yeah.
Kind of across the board in the work that you've done at CDPHE, are there audiences that are easier to start with? You know, that people might be more engaged around?
I think it's very specific to the issue and the behavior you're trying to change, right? So it's not as easy as saying, oh, you know, it's easy to get moms of, you know, young children to do something. I think a lot of it just depends on what the topic is and how we're trying to get them to change, for example. So, I mean, I will say, I think it's challenging to market to youth. There's a lot of skepticism that youth have. So I would say they're overall on any topic, I think that they've been a very difficult audience to try to engage with, because they've just grown up in this environment where they're just constantly being marketed to, and they have a lot of skepticism about that. But I think a lot of it just depends on what the topic is. And then you find out at the beginning, at that discovery phase, that research phase, how difficult it's going to be and where people are on the spectrum. So one of the examples I can give is, we had an ad campaign to try to get women connected to one of our breast and cervical cancer screening programs. And so we didn't have a lot of budget. We weren't able to do a lot of audience research. And so we thought that we were going to have to market to the women. We were going to have to convince them that they needed to be screened. And then we were going to have to connect them to the services and have them get their breast and cervical cancer screenings. And what we actually found through the ad campaign is that we didn't need to do the convincing. They knew that they needed to get screened already. They went, when we sent them through the ad campaign to our website, they went directly to the locations. Where can I get screened? They didn't look through the content about why I need to get screened, why is it good for me. So I think what you find out in the audience research phase at the very beginning of the campaign phase is like where people are on the spectrum and how hard it's going to be to get them to move. And I think it just depends issue by issue and who your audience is. Yeah.
For your vaping campaign, I'm just curious, outside of like the advertising, did you do anything to work with like school districts or counselors, nurses? Just because you talked about one audience being parents and then trusted adults, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think, from the state health department, I think a lot of that work happens through a lot of our local grantees and the connections that they make. So I think that I would say, quite frankly, we probably aren't doing as much work with the schools and the school districts as we should be. Oh, we are? Oh, do you want to jump in on that? Yeah, I mean, through the campaign, we are not as much.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Through the campaign is one modality, but there is a lot of work happening with schools and second chance and discipline procedures, particularly around vaping, because schools don't know how to deal with it. So there's funding going into kind of working with schools around behavior change, but on the campaign specific, you're right. Yeah.
But it's not, like our communications people, our marketing firm working with school districts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
I'll just turn it to the phone really quick. Are there any questions on the phone?
Can I throw out one more quick question?
Yeah.
I know you said that, like for the tobacco campaign that you're in, you're testing now. You're testing a lot of your messaging creative. You said it would launch next fall. So it sounds like this is a campaign that, like, kind of from start to launch is what, a year and a half, or? Kind of a typical time
What's a typical time frame? This is an aggressive time frame. We usually, from campaign kickoff to campaign launch, we usually try to do it in 9 months. Yeah, go ahead. Mostly because I think that there's a lot of anxiety about, like, once you have a campaign kickoff July 1, if the ads aren't running until the next July, people start getting a little antsy. So we usually typically, if we launch July 1, or if we start the work July 1, our campaigns usually launch sometime in the spring. So that the whole process goes through that. And then we aim to have campaign efforts where the campaign is running, for a year, 2 years, so that we can make sure that we have that sustained message out in the market, and then we are able to evaluate it. Yeah.
And that would include evaluation as well in that timeline?
The timeline, if we start working July 1, the campaign will be in market usually like April or May, and then the evaluation will be after that.
And any formative evaluation?
Oh, formative evaluation starts, we start July 1.
Okay.
Yeah. We do kind of the discovery process July 1, usually kind of campaign development, campaign testing in the fall, versioning, January, February.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Abigail. That was super helpful, and I think it gives us some specific examples and helps us think through the process. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle now to talk a little bit about some of the learnings we've had from No Kid Hungry, and then also just talk through some potential audiences and goals that we've come up with so that we can get you guys thinking and get some feedback on that.
So I just wanted to really build off of what Abby just talked to us about and remind all of us, and we've heard this time and again from No Kid Hungry and lots of different groups who work in this space, and you all know this through your own work, that basically what's happened with these public will campaigns is in our current environment, they are very compressed, right? They used to be, let's educate people. Okay, now we're going to engage people. Okay, now we're going to ask for an action of people, right? And now we're going to measure. And that entire process is now compressed into sort of one thing, right? And we know that. And so what helps me when I'm thinking through these kinds of topics is to really get simple in my head with what we're doing. And what we're doing is defining audience, defining ask, and defining the metrics we're trying to move, which to me is just 3 simple words we can keep at the forefront of what we're thinking about as we talk through this process. Because the challenge that is in front of us, from my perspective, and I think you all might agree, is that the blueprint is a broad plan for all kinds of people in Colorado who are experiencing hunger or who should care about people who are experiencing. I mean, it really is, it's everything, right, in one big pot. And so I think in order for us to be successful with any kind of public will building, just raising awareness of hunger is not going to get us there. We know that, right? We know we have to get more ruthless with ourselves around audience and ask and what metrics we're really trying to move. In terms of metrics, there's a lot of stuff in the blueprint that we can think of as the metrics, right? I keep returning to the blueprint, right? We had lots of groups sitting at the table deciding what these strategies should be, and to Abigail's point about we have to support. The reason for the existence of any kind of communications campaign is to support executing the strategies in the blueprint, right? It's not to just do a campaign, right? So we need to think, I think, carefully about what of these strategies and goals we could support with an overarching campaign. And I think that'll help us a little bit in defining audience and defining ask for those things. But there's a lot of them in here, right? We could run an entire campaign on seniors. We could run, run an entire campaign supporting getting people enrolled in SNAP and WIC. I mean, there's so many things that we could do here. And so I think the challenge for our group is to be a little bit ruthless with ourselves about what we're going to try to do. And then we got to figure out how we sell that to the rest of everybody who's working on this as the right first step. And I think, at least from my perspective, I think this is a multi-year campaign. And the blueprint itself is a 5-year effort, right? So this is probably a multi-year campaign. So I'd like for us to at least start this conversation with ourselves from the standpoint that we're not locked into one thing for the rest of eternity, that we can evolve this campaign over time as it makes sense for supporting various policies and goals of the blueprint. But I think, in order to demonstrate the value of this piece of the work, we've got to put our best foot forward when we start. So what I tried to do today, again, this is just to help us get our thought going, is a bit of a spaghetti at the wall approach. I thought I was thinking about this in sort of 3 different frames, 3 different potential approaches or doors that we could walk through to start thinking about how we get to audience ask and the metrics we're trying to move. And so I'm just going to show these to you. Please do not feel limited by them. Please accept them as a starting point for the conversation and just to kind of get us going. But because I suspect the answer to the question is a mixture of all the spaghetti I threw at the wall plus some other good ideas, and I think that's where we're headed. But in the interest of getting us to an actual proposal, we got to start somewhere. So one of the things that the blueprint asks us to do is increase public understanding that solving hunger is important, right? Solving hunger is important at the community level, it's important at the state level, and it means a lot of different things, right? So can we construct something that does put awareness first, but then has actions attached to that awareness? And can we construct something so that the awareness piece gives us the audiences and the metrics? I don't know the answer to that question. What I've written down for you all is just some ideas. So we raise awareness about the realities of hunger and how it impacts all of us. We're able to work then with a lot of different audiences or specifically segmented audiences, but more than one. you know, we have some answers to the why do I care, why should I engage question if we go this route through this awareness door. And there's lots of different actions we could request if you are aware of the impacts of hunger on your community. Again, it's not sexy, but if we go back to goal 1, it says increase public understanding and awareness that solving hunger is vital to the health and well-being of all individuals and families, the Colorado economy, and every local community, right? It's huge. So that was the first one that, again, that I wanted to just put in front of you all as a potential door we could start through. The second one is more of a kind of a campaign frame that I was thinking of, and it's sort of see hunger, right? So see hunger in your school, see hunger at your church, see hunger at the library, like see hunger around you. This is an audience of folks who aren't experiencing food insecurity or haven't experienced food insecurity in their lives, but who we would want to engage because oftentimes this is the same group of folks who are civic leaders, political movers and shakers, those sorts of folks. So kind of thinking about it more from going to a door that's more of a campaign frame. So raising awareness, which reduces the stigma around experiencing food insecurity. We're not picking a population, so we're not saying see hunger in seniors or see hunger in kids, right? We're just talking about it, see it around you, recognize that it exists. We can bring in many groups this way, and then we have, you know, I think there could be some very specific actions we could request out of this. Once you see hunger, here's what you do, kind of actions that we could think about. So this is the second one, and then I'll show you the third one. This is an audience population-specific one, so thinking about child hunger. There's some specific reasons that I put this one up here. One, I think that we can all probably agree, as much as we probably don't want to agree, but we can agree that people just are more sympathetic to kids being hungry. When you say 1 in 7 kids in Colorado are hungry, that is unacceptable, that one child goes to bed hungry, right? Less so when you say adults without dependent children are hungry, right? Nobody cares about that. So this would give us a population of folks that would be much more sympathetic and much more engaging to a larger group of people. It probably gives us some natural audiences, like, you know, moms and, you know, other people who would naturally be compelled by focusing on child hunger. I think there's some advantages here as well. Colorado is already a little used to thinking about this. Hunger Free has done some great work around this, especially with school lunches and those kinds of pieces where we've already sort of had some of this conversation in Colorado, maybe not enough of it, but certainly it's not brand new to folks. We have a lot of existing partners working in this space already. Our work group 5 is well down the road to pushing around the summer meals program, for example, and they've got lots of other plans in the works around school lunch and child nutrition, and so they're really far down the road in terms of defining the kinds of strategies that they're working on, so it might be a more immediate fit for us to, you know, going back to Abby's point, to sort of support those policies that they're already working on. Obviously, there are lots of other big national groups like No Kid Hungry who are already working in this space, so there might be some synergies we could get there in terms of just financial support or programmatic support, or, you know, that we could attach ourselves to as opposed to just starting this all ourselves. CDE, we know, has a planning grant to work on, which is why Work Group 5 has moved forward as quickly as it has. So there's lots of synergies to SNAP Ed, talking to families about, you know, helping kids eat healthier. So the partnerships line up in my head a little bit easier on this one in terms of what's already there that we wouldn't have to create new. And then there's just, and I think like all of those, there's a million different actions in the blueprint that we could support through a campaign like this. And I think we could even bring in ones that are not we could even bring in ones like increasing SNAP and WIC enrollment, because we know that that moves the needle on child hunger. And so there's maybe a broader range of strategies from all of the different goals of the blueprint that we could access and make as part of our metrics for what needles we're trying to move. So I'm going to stop there. Again, please don't feel limited by what I just said. I just wanted to kind of put 2 or 3 frames out there just to sort of lubricate our thinking on this issue, because it's a big lift, and I think in order to get to someplace that we can get support from the governing council for and the whole of the blueprint, we need some pretty good justification for what we're recommending, because we all know that this is going to be expensive. This is, and then we've got to do fundraising around it. So that's another, well, I'll put a pin in the fundraising because that just feels overwhelming to me at this exact moment. But so I just want to sort of stop there and ask for feedback, ask for your thinking. You agreed to be on the subcommittee, so I'm assuming you've given us at least a little thought at some point here about what you'd like to see or what makes the most sense to you from your experience or from your interest. So I'll just stop talking now and ask that we just start thinking about what this frame looks like.
I think the hunger or the child frame is really intriguing to me. Just one, because there can be a lot of fringe benefits too if we're supporting kids that also inadvertently supports families. So while we have a great focused audience and we're able to really tailor that messaging, there's going to be a lot of additional benefits. And then again, you said this, you know, it's easy to evoke feelings when you're talking about children too, and I think we've done that with CHIP and CHIP Plus. I mean, we've seen some great successful campaigns. So this one was really intriguing. The sea hunger, I struggle with that one because sometimes it can be such an invisible issue, and people continue to not really understand the depth that it is in their communities, even though it could be their neighbor or something like that. So that one I think could be, it could be a little tricky.
I almost wondered, because I agree with you, looking at the goals of the blueprint are a helpful frame for thinking about the campaign. And I wondered if it is awareness about hunger, and the realities of hunger may be population specific, but almost having the ask or the action vary by time frame. So you start with summer meals, right? And the timing on that is the ask to participate in summer meals. And then it moves to enrollment for schools and school lunches. And then it moves to maybe SNAP and WIC. And I know SNAP and WIC is not necessarily time specific, but I mean, there might be times where there is more increased enrollment and we could look at that data. And I believe there is to some degree, some seasonality. But I'm wondering if the ask is the participation in these programs and that it connects to all of the different goals of the work group.
Yeah, just to piggyback, you know, I'm lucky enough to sit in some of the other work groups, and what's been really interesting, and so there is some really great work happening in work group 5. They were able to get summer meals planned together very, very quickly. And we'll see what that looks like, but you know, we were kind of behind there was a lot of time pressure. It was very time sensitive because we hadn't thought it through. And the same now in the next couple of months, thinking about promoting school lunches. So I absolutely agree that there are these concentric circles that really help kids and families, and then have these secondary amazing benefits, right? So CDE will be going for an implementation grant that will also help them plan more proactively for the next year or however long. And so there could be some synergy around the things that they want to see and how they do the infrastructure on maximizing participation in child nutrition programs, and then also bringing in, you know, CDPHE and all of their efforts with those programs. So there's going to be sort of the systems and policy and toolkit and on the ground work, and that could be supported, as you're saying, with this awareness campaign, population specific frame.
The question I have flowing out of that, Max, is how do we engage people who don't need these programs, right? Like it's easy for me to think about, and I know that work group 5 has already been working on it. Like, you know, if you need to get summer meals for your kid, you need to figure out where they are, and then you need to connect your kid to those, which engages me then in what they're putting in front of me. But what is the ask for folks who don't need summer meals for their kids? Like, how do we get them to engage with us on in some other way, instead of saying, I don't need that, so I'm going on to the next issue, right? So to me, it's that awareness piece of hunger for folks who have never experienced it, which is a lot of folks in Colorado, or who don't experience it now, and so therefore don't think about it. That's the part that feels difficult to me, and what that audience is.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just going back to some of the things we learned from No Kid Hungry and some of our other conversations is it is part about the programs and the specific folks who need them, but it is about public and political will. So how do you then change policies? Abigail, that you talked about, and then funding, which I know Hunger Free's been able to secure some through your coalitions. But when we're looking at solving hunger in Colorado, we're going to need people to care about it, and then to support general fund and policies and local efforts. So I think that goes to your statement around the people who can actually also make the change, being educated about this within some frame.
I think that's,
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, first of all, thank you for tying all of these back to actions and just pointing out the importance of, like, it cannot only be awareness building, like, because then that falls short, that we need to tie to action. There's been a lot of really good discussion around this child hunger focus. I think it's where we have the most momentum as already partners, but I also had the same thought of how, you know, if our goal is broader statewide public will building, that we would need to figure out how to make it beyond just enrollment in, you know, those initial programs. The second one, the one about See Hunger, was actually pretty intriguing to me. I think it can be challenging, but I feel like if we don't have people seeing it or recognizing it to reduce that stigma, we're not going to make a lot of ground. Like that first, I'll say even Hunger Free Colorado does a lot of work already around hunger impacts you, it impacts your community, the economic drivers, and that's where we base a lot of our messaging, which was more around maybe that first one, but that is still a struggle when stigma exists and when people say, well, I don't really believe it's in my community. Like, hunger's out there, people have it, but it's not here, it's not in my neighborhood. And so if this campaign frame could be done effectively, I think we could see really positive results. But I will say that this is challenging for the point that Khadija made, like, it's hard for people to recognize it because it is an invisible issue. So it's not to say that I necessarily have an answer. I think that we have a lot of momentum in the child hunger, but we'd have to somehow make that pivot to make it a broader state issue.
So when you talk about the pivot, and if we're looking like a 5-year horizon, so I've never done this, right? We're gonna get, right? This isn't my specialty. But if you start with a target population, is it harder to pivot then to add more over time to make it bigger, to kind of layer on? Mm-hmm. That would be my question, because I mean, it is so massive. So do we pick a starting point and then layer, or is that just counterproductive because then it's all over the place?
And I honestly don't know. Maybe Abigail may have more insight. But I mean, we could build on success potentially, you know, if we just need to, you know, make sure that we have momentum to get going, to have an impact, get people enrolled. And we are, you know, definitely linking, like one thing that Hunger Free Colorado has been working on is getting a checkbox on the free and reduced lunch application to get families enrolled into SNAP. Because we know that if they're already on that program, they can qualify for school meals automatically, that then the school gets better, you know, funding. And so there's like a whole series of benefits if you get families enrolled, but we're starting through a tool that's already there, the free and reduced lunch application. So, and working the other way then to SNAP to then again bounce back to benefit the schools. So I think that there are ways that, you know, if we are encouraging enrollment in one, that maybe then we can make it a smaller jump to the next, and then kind of talk about that greater impact on communities and school funding and then economy as a whole. But we'd have to obviously be strategic in that, so.
I want to say, to make another comment about the see it, because I think it's a really good jumping point off for video, because we can show what it's like. And I was thinking about our Hunger Through My Lens project, where we have pictures of like a pantry that's bare. We could have a video where the kid comes home from school to grab an after-school snack, and they don't have any options. I also saw recently one where during lunch, like a kid goes to drink water, goes around the hallway, takes time in the bathroom because he doesn't have food to eat. So it's really, I think we can show a little bit of what hunger is like, but we don't because it's not the things that people see, but we can see it through the people's eyes who have actually experienced hunger. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I like that. I was just going to mention how you could, the different ways that you can visualize it. But also, I see, when we talk about how to reach broader audiences and how it affects policy, is that, and I'm on social media a lot, my state representatives do a very good job of that when they see an issue in the community and they post it on their Facebook page and rally people around it because someone has come to them, the community has come to them and said, this is a concern that we need a policy about. And then all of a sudden, you know, they'll put something out there and even sign a petition or whatever it is that, to bring it to light. So I feel like we have the opportunity that once, and I don't even know if we have to have a certain amount of folks on board that this is an issue, that we just go straight to the policymakers and see how they can help spread the word about it. And with the facts that we have, and say, this is an issue that we need to get pushed through for policy, but also if you couple that with them being in a video that visualizes all the hunger that's going on in different areas at home. And I'm even envisioning, you know, a child is getting pushed away and they can't get lunch in school because they owe money. Because I got an issue with that. Everybody hopefully learn about that. Like, that's a policy that needs to end. You know, to even charge kids and say that you can't even graduate from high school because you owe money. Because at some point you were hungry and didn't have the money. You know, so I just think there's great potential, and I don't know that I really see that it's hard, that it's going to be hard.
The one thing I want to bring up or just ask a question to people in this room, I think particularly when we think about just focusing on the child's hunger frame, I mean, I think agreed in terms of invoking emotions, and there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of momentum around that. But I think, like, what role does that have in perpetuating stigma around hunger of, like, vulnerable and helpless children, right? They're the ones who are experiencing hunger. I just want to be really thoughtful about the Blueprint's role in changing the narrative around it. And does that reduce stigma, or does that get more people into resources? And either one is okay, but I think we just need to be really thoughtful about what some of the unintended consequences might be.
I think that's a good point. I mean, when we go back to the data, about 50% of the families experiencing hunger in Colorado are above the threshold for any of these programs. And I don't know how we talk about that when it's cost of living versus livable wage. But yeah, it shouldn't just be about those people who are, you know, under this threshold, because it obviously is not the whole thing. I you know, that's a curveball. I don't know what to do with it.
Sorry, I'm turning this off and on. Just another spitballing at this point, but just another potential frame of why care, and actually using the community to talk to us about why they care about hunger, and not really going to the people that are hungry, but like, I care about hunger because my neighbor went hungry, or, you know, using stories from the community and really using the power of storytelling and having the empathy come from the community versus trying to, like, this is why it's important and this is why it matters. So I mean, kind of maybe reversing it. I just wanted to add this. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I just grabbed it because she was.
You're going. No, I was, as both of what you said, I would say, I agree with. I think there's like, why don't we start with our policymakers in terms of making them a key audience for us, since they're the ones that can have an impact and actually take some direct action related to that. And then the other thing is having people, even though we say it's hard to identify hunger, using a teacher to say, this is what it looks like when I'm in a classroom with kids and how they behave or how I recognize that or how that impacts their learning. And then identifying other audiences that we know who can readily identify hunger. You know, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I mean, it could even be a coach talking about a kid who wants to, you know, participate in sports and how that impacts his ability to do so and do so, you know, his full potential, you know, whatever the case is, but identifying those different people who maybe say, this is how I could tell this kid was hungry, and then having them doing the storytelling from their perspective as well, since it's so hard to identify just for the general public.
Because when we talk about stigma, if there's a messaging that we could put together just so that folks can understand it's not anybody's fault that they're hungry. Because the stigma comes from folks feeling like, oh, I didn't do enough. I don't have enough money, you know, and it makes them feel down about it. But we got to get a message that says through no fault of anyone else's. This is what, you know, this is what's happening of the family of the child or whatever. To remove the stigma, even for them even wanting to apply for SNAP.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what I was thinking is if the campaign could be focused more about the stigma around school lunches or, you know, SNAP or WIC, really trying to change the story about the programs to help kind of drive enrollment, and that might be a way to focus or narrow down. The other piece is that I was thinking about is if we knew the policies that we were interested in working on, then you can have an awareness campaign that ties into that. For instance, if you did a sugary sweetened beverage campaign about the hidden dangers of sugary beverages and then introduce a tax on sugary beverages, that might kind of solicit some additional support. So knowing what policies we're going to change and building or potentially change, it might help kind of narrow the focus of a campaign in that way.
When I think about that, I think that's a great aspect of a camp, of what we can do through education and success stories. To me, some of that feels like a module almost, and building on the communities that have been successful and sharing that more as at a community level, like you were talking about. So engaging having the resources that have already been developed in the communities that have passed this sugary tax, and then what the impact can be, and then providing it to the legislature. Like that could be a module, but not necessarily the full campaign of what we're trying to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I would say it might depend on the policies. Like, what are the policies that we want people to act on? And I don't even know that answer myself. And we might have some examples, but knowing that you might be able to build the ask, like your first example showed. What is the ask to call your legislator? Why? Is it just about hunger, or is it about something more specific?
And it seems like that's the challenge that we're in. From my perspective, is there's a lot of policy change in the blueprint. So, right? So, what do we pick those policies that we're going to try to support? And then, so again, this is why, at least for part of this, my head went to like the child hunger piece. And I totally respect what Erin just said. The reason my head went there was because we already have work group 5. They've defined a whole lot of the work that they're doing, and we could support that while also raising awareness about the fact that hunger exists for kids. And so that's why my head went to that one. But it's certainly not the only one. And, you know, I think that's the challenge for us. And Erin, I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you started like 5 minutes ago. But like, you know, I mean, again, if what we can do is put some money behind raising awareness that we've got a hunger issue and checking 5 boxes of strategies that we know we need to check, like what is what are those things that we could do?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot of possibilities, and I think the blueprint is awesome as kind of a framework and a guide. And I think figuring out kind of how all of this infrastructure works together, so I'm not going to give you a good answer today. But I do know that, you know, like the governing council is talking about, you know, what are the committees that we need, or what are the processes that we need to put in place? My job will be to kind of help coordinate across the work groups. So work group 4 is most likely going to be working on a policy agenda around WIC and SNAP over the summer. So that could be really helpful to drive some of the content of a campaign. Work group 5 is working on access to child nutrition programs, and kind of depending on where they land in terms of their main goals, having that tie into a campaign makes total sense. So I think there's a lot of pieces from all of the work groups that will contribute, and I think where I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around, and I'm going to make a little plug for the survey in this. I sent out a survey a couple of weeks ago, or last week maybe. So if you can respond to that with your experience in terms of the blueprint, we're trying to kind of build that structure as we go, which is a little bit challenging. But I do want to hear input from people, and you know, if we need to course correct, let's do that. But there will be opportunity, I think, as we get deeper into implementation to leverage the work groups off of one another. But I would say at this point in time, other than work group 5, because CDE has a really clear agenda both through a planning grant and they just applied for an implementation grant, it's a little bit still fuzzy. So.
And to build on that a little bit too, I mean, I think Jennifer answered your question a little bit earlier. You know, I do think that there is an opportunity to pivot, right? I mean, not pivot, but to kind of adjust our strategy. I mean, I think there's an opportunity to kind of like start some of the work, look at the evaluation, see where we are, make adjustments along the way. So I think, you know, that's possible in campaigns like this. But I would also say, I think we do need to be really thoughtful at the front end about kind of what the it is. Because what we can do is, even if, let's say, the first part of the campaign is education and awareness, and the second part of the campaign is action. If that first part of the campaign, we're putting all these resources into education and awareness for moms, for example, but then the action down the road is really to like engage the business community to do something, that first stage that we've done, those resources have kind of not, I don't want to say totally wasted, because it's good to have that conversation in the community, but it's not the best use of resources unless we kind of know what the end goal is. So I said we can make adjustments, but we want to make sure that it all aligns so that all along the way, all of the resources we're putting into this campaign really kind of get to where we want to get.
And then your experience, is it that we need to maybe do some market research? Like, what do people who don't know anything about hunger, what would be the compelling story, or what would they need to act? I mean, again, don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I know there's some immediate communication needs that we might be able to fill, but I think that was one of the things we talked about initially, is like, do we bring in somebody who knows this, it's paid to kind of manage a way to catalyze based on sort of the blueprint syllabus and then the work that's happening. And because I mean, we could go in 1,000 directions.
Right. I do think we bring them in, but I think it's once we figure out what the it is a little bit. I mean, we can always bring people out to help facilitate conversations. I think it's probably bigger than those of us in this room too. But I think, you know, I think you want to make sure that audience research that you're pulling in is about how do people feel about the it, and what are they going to do about the it, and what's going to motivate them to change their behavior around that. And we have to figure out how to figure out what that it is. So that we can hire someone, I think, to facilitate conversations around that and help define the it, and then do the audience research around it. But I think that kind of the content is what we define first.
Try to get a little closer.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question to Hunger Free? You guys do a lot of public opinion polling, and like, where are we starting from? Like, what do people know and what do they not know? Like, do people know that hunger is an issue and now we're trying to get them to take action, or do we have to raise awareness about hunger? Or do we know? Maybe we don't know that, but I know you guys have done public opinion polling, so sorry.
Yeah, and we actually will be doing another public opinion, or kind of like a voter poll this fall. So our last one was 3 years ago, and I can bring up the kind of the data and the findings from that. But essentially, I mean, there is strong support in the community for finding solutions. People do feel it's an important issue. What I mentioned earlier about people not feeling like it's in their neighborhood, like that is something that came out of some of our voter poll findings, is that people recognize it's an issue, they think it's something important to address, but they're not always willing to acknowledge that it's in their own area. And so that, I think, is where we have kind of the challenge in needing to bridge that gap and make people recognize. And that is also why a lot of our messaging is around the community benefit as a whole. I mean, that type of messaging is, a lot of it comes from frameworks, which is definitely research-based. It's looking at behavior change. It's saying when you talk about, the public and like community well-being, when you talk about kind of the greater benefits tying things to health, like you're going to make a lot more inroads than just simply talking about the issue of hunger. So that's where a lot of ours go from, and I would encourage you in the messaging coming out of this to, take similar texts, because we know that it works and we know that it's been tested and we can build on that.
And I guess one follow-up question to that, is that poll that you're doing in the fall set, and are there questions that this group would want to think about potentially adding to that poll and or funding it?
Well, if there is a funding behind it, of course we could add some questions. So we have not set those questions in stone yet. So I actually, in having this discussion, was listening pretty closely, like, oh, is there something that I could weave into that? Obviously, cost to do that voter poll is based on, time, number of questions, things like that. So, but if there is something that we want to add into it, I mean, it's already planned, we already have, an organization that's going to be doing it. So depending on what we're interested in adding or what that would mean, obviously, there could be, if there's some funding there, then there's definitely more possibility of putting some stuff in that would benefit this work group and the blueprint.
Sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure that we're engaging everyone on the phone too. So Janae from Metro Carrying had a comment that it's the fault of the system we live in, not naming the root cause of hunger, which is the capitalist racist society that America is built on and will have us in these boardrooms for another 20 years. Janae, did you want to add anything to that? Can unmute you.
Hi, sorry, I just had a problem unmuting. It's just, I feel like can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
We could hear you. We're not hearing you now.
Okay, so my issue with naming the it is that if we don't name the it properly, and actually name what the society is, and the reason why people are going hungry is because, and why they don't think it's happening in their neighborhood is because they think it's a black and brown problem. And I think that's what you need to start shifting the narrative around, is that it's not just a black and brown problem. It's that there are a large group in a class situation where they're not able to get the resources that they need. And if we're not naming why it's a class issue and a race issue, I think that's where we will do a lot of disservice to the actual work. And it won't come off as genuine if we don't start talking about it in that way. I just want to say that.
Thanks, Janae.
I also, I really appreciate that, because I it has come up, and even on the steering committee, trying to, I don't even know how to say it, to address the issue as broadly as possible without alienating folks who may not be comfortable having the conversation about structural racism. And that said, I wonder about how we leverage the activism and the advocacy groups around their messaging while not repeating it. So Metro Caring clearly has some great messaging about equity and inclusivity. The Blueprint really wants to integrate equity and inclusivity, hunger free. So there's some advocacy organizations that are really active and actually have the expertise in that space. So how do we kind of bring that in, or sort of create that space that isn't necessarily Blueprint focused, but informs it while the organizations that have this expertise continue to do that work and push that narrative.
I totally understand that. Can I just want to say, though, that if it's not coming from you either, and this is like the bigger hand than the other 5 fingers that are like doing that work, and if you're not saying that, then we're not having that reinforced messaging. You understand? Like, if there's a lot of individual places that can do that type of work, but also if you're not, if Blueprint Colorado is like the bigger hand of all of this, then it doesn't make sense for us to do DEI work if you're not doing DEI work. And also the whole comfort level of this, like at this point, like what, like I just don't understand why that's necessary. Like it's just, it's uncomfortable to be hungry. It's uncomfortable to be in racist situations. It's uncomfortable for a lot of different reasons. So like, why not like push past this discomfort and then start to see like where we can actually start to build ground? Because the more we start to like pander to this comfort level of folks who are not willing to actually stand up and help these root causes like be shined on, the more we start to be in these board meetings for the next 20 years talking about how we're going to end hunger in a place where we throw away millions of tons of food every single day.
So this is Erin, and I totally agree with you. So I think, you know, as it's a conversation we've been having, and it's a very circular conversation that we've been having to date. And I think, you know, again, I'm on week 4, so, but I do think that, I mean, that was the reason that I brought up kind of focusing on children. Like, what does that do in terms of perpetuating stigma? Like, there are structural reasons that hunger exists in our society, and we need to address that. So how, I don't know, but I agree.
And go ahead, Kelly.
Can I just say also that we have to also think about perpetuating, as we address the racial piece, perpetuating something that's people are already believing, which is that it is a Black and brown problem, because it's not. And, you know, as crass as it may sound, if people are only going to empathize with somebody who's like them, then in order to move the needle, maybe that is, you know, an approach that you have to take in terms of identifying that it's not just a Black and brown problem, and trying to broaden it beyond that so that people will engage. And then at the end of the day, it impacts Black and brown people because they're getting the policy change and the things that we need to happen. So I don't have the exact answer to that, but I think there's also that kind of dynamic at play where you can, I know I've seen it, you know, when I worked in the school system where, you know, when it comes to free and reduced lunch, you always put a Black or brown kid in an advertisement. And the reality is the people who were taking advantage of that were not all Black and brown, and the majority were not. So I think that, you know, I don't have the exact answer, but I think that's also something we need to take into consideration.
Yeah, so a few points. One, I was going to say, you know, in terms of some of the pitfalls, if we do go with child hunger, I know in some of our messaging, sometimes people who don't understand the issue or aren't those, or maybe the families enrolling in the programs are like, oh, kids are hungry, it's the parents' fault. Like, they're not taking care of the kids. Or like, there was one time we put out a post that was how Colorado had made such great success in school breakfast. And someone was like, I can't believe the mothers aren't feeding their children. So it was very much something that you have to be aware of if we're doing a broader campaign, that we don't want it coming back to look like kids are hungry because parents aren't being responsible. And some of our most successful Hunger Through My Lens participants actually are white women with master's degrees, doctors, who have had a medical issue, or maybe they've gone through a job loss and they need to enroll in food stamps, and they've been willing to advocate and talk out and speak up about that. And I really, you know, as sad as it is, the reason that I think their stories are more prevalent, more successful, the media wants to talk to them, people respond to them more, because they're white women who look like, you know, your middle class family more, or even, you know, upper middle class, because it's what they would consider, you know, successful people who have needed help. And so that might be something we consider. I know we're always very attentive in any images that we put out, videos that we do, photography we use, that we're not perpetuating stereotypes that it's only one race or one group of people that are experiencing this. So I think all things, good things to keep in mind.
One of the things I was wondering too is if we go back to the conversation about impact. So if we say, let's strengthen Colorado's economy, let's end hunger. Let's improve graduation rates, let's end hunger. Let's improve our healthcare system, let's end hunger. You know, those kinds of things where we're really outcome impact based, but it starts with something maybe they could relate to. And they might be surprised that hunger is actually impacting it. Again, you know, there's these ways that we could get around some of the more controversial pieces, but engaging people in kind of all of those. You know, I think that maybe there's some juice there, I don't know.
Okay, so how do we get to this, Anne?
I know. So magic wand here.
Yeah, it's tough. And as I'm sitting here listening to everybody's points and ideas, I keep going back to this story that you guys have heard a million times now, and how we replicate that out of my little elementary school, where everybody realized that we have kids in our school who have huge lunch debt. We have families in our school who are carrying that burden, and they stepped up and got rid of it. And in fact, got rid of it for the entire, we raised so much money, we got rid of it for the entire year. And how do we replicate that in terms of recognition that hunger, they solved the hunger in our school, they eliminated the lunch debt, which didn't solve the problem forever, but also send a message to our families who were struggling that we care. Like, how do we, that, to me, if we could do something like that at a statewide level, that's a huge, to me, that's a huge, it doesn't solve all the policy issues, it does not fix structural racism, it doesn't do any of those things, but it does elevate the issue of hunger with a larger group of people. It works on the stigma issue, just in terms of we're paying attention to you, we see the struggles you're in, and we want to support you. Yeah, so that's where I'm stuck in my head, is like, how do we, what does a campaign look like that does that?
And I hear the word support, and I think that's important, because people don't want to feel like they're getting a handout, you know. And if you could change the verbiage to say that this is just another way that we support, and a lot of people need support in different ways, and that it's not going to be anything permanent, or you know, it's temporary. And so just a way to say that this is just a support system like any other support system for people who are experiencing a job loss, or your medical bill, and that you know, you just can't afford it at this point, or the budget for your food because of X, Y, and Z. And so a messaging around that, I think, would be key, and it would leave folks maybe with the dignity that they think that they won't get for signing up for SNAP.
Yes. We do that with our campaign for the Earned Income Tax Credit, when we're talking to certain audiences, partners, as well as policymakers and public officials. People who claim the Earned Income Tax Credit are only eligible for 2 to 3 years, typically, so they cycle in and out of eligibility because either they truly have been lifted out of poverty and have gotten to a place where they're earning more, they're no longer eligible for it, their circumstances have changed, and so that's the messaging that we've used as well, to kind of be able to broaden it so that people can understand this is a temporary thing, it's something that people need, it's only for a short term, and so trying to, again, remove that stigma.
Right, because folks can experience this at any time of their lives, that they may be in a position where they're going to need some support. And this is one way we support, with, you know, kids being hungry, families being hungry.
Erin, can we come back to you again just for kind of maybe a processing, so that you might be ready to give us, because we don't have a prevention area coming to us and saying, we need you to help us get persuadable adults to stop smoking, or we need you to help us get parents to talk to their kids about why vaping is bad. When you look out on the horizon, in terms of all of the work groups up and running, like, is there a timeline that we should be better aligned with, or could be better aligned with, that doesn't make us sit forever and not do anything, but does acknowledge that the highest and best use of this effort would be to support Blueprint goals as they, or policies as they come forward. Like, is there something we could align to, because we're obviously stuck, so.
Yep. So 2 things. I think on that, I think there will be a timeline. So there is not a timeline today. That's a conversation I need to have with the governing council. And I'm having those same, like, just looking through survey responses, again, second plug. I only have one from work group 1. So please respond. Is really thinking about just that. So I think, you know, there's this like high energy, people want to move. And I think there's also, what I'm hearing is like, we don't necessarily all have the same like level set background of like, how do we move? How do the work groups work together? What's the relationship between the work groups and the governing council? And I'm not going to take you through my whole thing, but I think there's a lot of things that we need to figure out and put in place to kind of build infrastructure, and we can absolutely do some of that as we go. And I think it's resulting in some of these conversations where it's like really challenging to take a step forward. So I don't know, but like if there is a need to like look at, we want to wait for polling data, or what are the questions, what's the baseline that we want to know about in terms of where people are at around hunger, or is it that this group says we want to support policy, and so let's talk to the other work groups about what are some of the policies that are bubbling up for them. I want to be really thoughtful about connecting all of this, and again, it's kind of been moving and I'm just starting, so it's a awkward spot. But yeah, I mean, I think if a pause is needed, that's absolutely allowed. And if you feel like you've got some stuff that you want to just move on, then we can do that too. So I don't want to stop any group's progress, and I also want to allow some space for, it's going to take a couple of months to figure this out in terms of all the infrastructure and how it all connects to each other. So my own timeline of kind of figuring out what the infrastructure looks like is like an August-ish time frame, and getting all of that, like, I mean, we don't have staffing yet. We've got great consultants who've been engaged in different ways over time. So I think there's a lot of pieces that we have to figure out. We're hopefully going to have some bylaws for the governing council next week. So there's, again, a lot of pieces. I think August in terms of the infrastructure timeframe. So if that's helpful at all. Where are we right now?
Is that helpful, guys? I'm just treading water here.
I mean, I think we've had a lot of really good discussion today. It's like, this needs to happen in order for us to move forward. So I think it's still progress. I think it's just that we all know there are so many issues at hand, and we're in flux right now because of where the blueprint is at. So I don't think it's like a bad thing. I think it's good for us to know there are a lot of priorities out there. We just may not have an answer at the end in 15 minutes. 17, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a continuing conversation, and one thing that came to mind is even mapping out who can carry the messages that maybe the blueprint shouldn't. We're all in a collaboration, and we all have some ways of sharing messages, and we have some great resources, and mapping that out with a timeline, and then looking at potentially where the other work groups are, and then maybe even going back to the blueprint and saying, okay, we know that we need to do a couple of these things, and we make some, some preliminary recommendations. We don't have to flesh it out, but certainly it'd be great for, I think, also our external partners. We'd like you to carry some of the messages, but we're not going to carry all of the messages as a collaborative, because then, it just becomes one message, and it gets dilutive to some degree. The power of an advocacy organization.
And I think, Michelle, kind of for one of the things you were talking about, I mean, I think, we could potentially pick that as the it, right? I mean, I think that story that you told about school lunches and getting rid of the debt, that has stuck with me since you mentioned that at our very first meeting. That could be the it, and it could be the thing that we use to move forward. And I think the blueprint has a lot of really ambitious goals, and has a lot of progress that they could make as these work groups could implement things, and they can all be supported, I think, if work group 1 aligns with some of those efforts. So, I mean, I think, you know, in terms of like cart before the horse, I think that there could potentially be opportunities maybe for us to wait and see what happens with some of the other work groups, maybe have conversations with them about it, because I think if we can support some of those goals, they're going to be more successful if there is that public will building campaign or those supportive messages in the community to support those things happening, whether it's WIC enrollment or food banks or whatever.
I'm wondering, the part that makes me uncomfortable is that if we're thinking about a 9-month horizon, taking your typical, right? And then that doesn't start until 5 months from now when we finally know what the structure is. Like, is that comfortable for us or not? And is there a way that we could think of the, why do I care? Like, there's some sort of overarching framework we start building now that is the why do I care or see hunger or whatever that framework is, because anything can live under that, right? Any goal or framework that the blueprint puts forward, any one of the work groups has things that could live under that overarching umbrella. So can we open the umbrella now? And again, I'm violating half of my rules with the whole, like, what's the ask? But I mean, like, could we pick a couple of asks that live under that umbrella comfortably, and then we just keep adding things under it as the blueprint starts to march, the other work groups march forward? I
think you can. Personally, I think you can say that one of the ask on this will be to address some of the goals of the blueprint, and these are the ones that might fall within that umbrella or that ask. But we still have so much work to do in creating the RFP or whatever the proposal will look like. We have to get it approved by the governing council. I mean, we need to understand our budget. So I think we can, if we're in agreement about sort of what direction the ask might go in, I think that is a helpful piece, but then there's a whole lot of work that has to be done to get sort of the framework of the campaign even off the ground at all.
I agree with that. I think there is a way to do some foundational things that don't lock us in. And even just in this conversation, we now know that maybe we can approach Ellie around some questions, and we know maybe we put forward a proposal and figure out how much it would cost to get SNAP WIC and food resource hotline on your SNAP Ed website. You know, so there's been some, you know, just some little things that we could take away. But then also, I do agree that if we're looking at this horizon, there may be a way to build a foundation that is an umbrella that things can come under, as you stated. I think that's really doable, and we don't have to have everything figured out, which is also awesome.
So I'm hearing a few next steps, definitely, including talking about research, polling more, confirming our umbrella frame, and I feel like there have been a few thrown out, including why care about hunger, as well as the see hunger frame, I think, but I don't want to put words in our mouths, and I don't know if that's the exact text, but I'm just saying. And then, but I do think also like identifying some goals that we want to focus on to start with, and I feel like a few that have been thrown out there include the policy work that work group 4 and 5 are focusing on, as well as increased enrollment or participation in some of the SNAP WIC, child nutrition, free and reduced lunch programming. But I want to make sure I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth and I'm kind of aggregating that correctly. Are there any big things that I've missed there or things that I've said incorrectly?
I just wanted to add because we had mentioned what makes people care, and the messaging that we use, it's said a little bit more nicely than this, but saying that this could be you. But I mean, so many families now are in debt and they're just living paycheck to paycheck. And it takes such a little tweak in your life to throw you into the spot where you're that unimagined, oh, I guess there are people out there who had that tweak and now this is where they are. And I am so close to that point. And I think that messaging resonates with a lot of people because then it puts it in the perspective of, oh, this is something I need to worry about. And I need to fix for the people who are experiencing it now so that when, you know, heaven forbid that happens to me, that there's stuff in place to help my family.
what two wise people who may or may not be in this room said, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And the other was, no, I don't think anyone who's hungry would care if someone just helped solve the problem, right? So there are, it's like, let's do something, right? And not, yeah, we don't have to fix everything, but if something gets solved, everyone's happy, yeah.
So would it be useful to the group if we tried to structure a next meeting around some decision-making around what policies we might support in the first round, and what kinds of questions we might foist upon hunger-free, and like some way to move. I'm looking for a way to take a step forward and not stop working, but not try to run down the road too fast. So with that, maybe defining a few policies that we could all support that might live under that first umbrella that we do, as well as thinking about how we can get more information from things that are existing, like the hunger-free poll.
Yeah, one thing I'm wondering is if we can ask the other work groups about what ways we can support them. And, so I think that's my missing puzzle, and I know it's come up a few times, is there are work groups that are doing some of this, for instance, CBE. So we don't want to, of course, replace what work they're doing to move that forward.
Oh, they want help.
Yeah. No, but is it, what are the goals from those work groups that this work group can then inform and move forward with?
Yeah, and I think definitely some of that is known already in terms of work group 5. Work group 4 has recently had some conversations around the policies that they're focused on, but I don't know if any decisions have been made. I know, no, they have not, but I think we can have more, we can have more conversations with the chairs. And then also in terms of work group 2-3, I know they've taken a different approach, so I think it's a little different there. What I mean by that is their approach has been much more focused on how their work group is going to work, how they're going to make decisions, and they haven't made any decisions yet. That doesn't mean that we can't go back in the future and say, how can we support you, or even start that conversation. But I think some of that information is known already, but I think sharing that in a more concise way is a really good idea.
Do you know, when it comes to the policies that they're putting together, these are policies that, have they been introduced before and they failed, or these are new policies? Because I'm wondering if they've gone to current policymakers and asked if they proposed any kind of similar hunger bills that did not go through, and find out, what was the barrier or resistance, and then be able to put together something to address that. So my question is, are they doing this cold, or are they actually talking to some policymakers before they put forth something?
So yeah, in terms of work group 4, one of the co-chairs works at CCLP, the Colorado Center for Law and Policy, so they are working closely with policymakers to kind of develop a policy agenda, and then they're trying to kind of work with the work group to figure out what the broader blueprint policy agenda might look like. But absolutely, they are having those conversations. As the blueprint, I think we need to have those conversations, and we need to do it probably more broadly than we have in the past.
Yeah, I think Michelle knows it, and that we have to make some actions and steps. So I guess in terms of, I'm hearing your ask being talking about how we can really identify what the other work groups need from us, what other research would be helpful, so that we can make some decisions next meeting about what priority areas or goals we might start with from the blueprint that are already laid out. Is there other information that we could do research on, or other information we could pull to help you guys with that?
I just wanted to say also, Max, your question. So, the good thing also about like CDE and CDPHE on work group 5 is that they're also working closely with some of the national partners that have evidence-based marketing strategies like No Kid Hungry. So they're kind of looking at their internal work and then what could they bring in nationally, so that a lot of this wouldn't fall on work group 1, except to push it out. But then how does work group 1 look at the broader issue of like hunger isn't even being talked about? You open the paper and you'll see affordable housing and homelessness like on the front page, 3 or 4 times a week. And then you ask people if they know that 1 in 7 kids is hungry, and they're blown away. So it's sort of a whole mixed bag of all the things that are possible in this work group.
think that's where I get siloed a little bit because I want the ask to be clear and to not just have an awareness building campaign, but maybe that's where I need to think a little bit differently. For instance, I would rather focus in on SNAP enrollment or WIC enrollment and that be the goal and target the work. But I can also think differently.
Oh, this definitely has to, I mean, that's.
Has to happen.
Yes, but it might not, it has to be tied into this,
Yeah.
but it might not have to be done immediately because
Okay.
we have to scale, like,
If we just say everybody enroll in SNAP, but there's no application assisters and Hunger Free hasn't scaled up.
No, good point.
You know, so it's sort of this
We
whole.
saw that a little bit with
the
some of-
timing
yeah.
piece, yeah.
So I can bring in the RFP that we used for SNAP Ed social marketing campaign. I don't think it's perfect by any means, and Abby probably has some better examples, but it might give a structure for how our proposal looks, for what kinds of things we laid out and the expectations we asked a group to come to us with, and I'm happy to share that next week.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of your concern about connecting it, I mean, there's a connection because you do have to have some awareness and some air cover for, you know, removing that stigma so that people will act. So there has to be that piece as well that precedes and overlaps with the, you know, enrollment piece and actual action and change in behavior.
Sorry, one other thing we just might want to think about too, I think going to the work groups is good, and it might also be good to just understand from the governing council kind of, they probably have a good overarching support about what's happening in all of the branches, or all of the work groups. So just making sure that yeah,
Eventually.
they do. But just making sure that like whatever path we move forward is something that is going to meet their expectations, and that we're kind of aligning with their priorities as well.
We mentioned coming together at some point with the other work groups at one of our meetings, just so we can all link up together and do a check-in. Are we going to do that?
So that's actually something that I'd like to propose to the governing council, and they don't know that, neither does anybody else yet, to do like some sort of summit or get together of all of the stakeholders of the blueprint. So that's a proposal that I'm definitely looking at, but it probably wouldn't be like September, October timeframe, of getting it on people's calendars and like actually making that happen. So.
Okay.
One thing.
Now that you said that, I think did we mention that it was going to be, did we have a date when we talked about that? Because we didn't.
I don't think so. We did, however, invite some work group 4 members to the SNAP with the marketing meeting we are having on the 25th, as their focus in work group 4 is increasing enrollment in SNAP and WIC and utilization of SNAP WIC, so we saw a direct tie. But I think to your point, anytime we can make sure there's overlap, whether it be them being at the meetings, whether it be making sure we're sharing that information, I think it's really important to collaborate. So any ideas are welcome. So, yeah.
I just feel like we weren't asking a lot about what the other groups are doing until it just like makes sense that we're not going to be able to move forward until we understand what's going on as a whole.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're all still, I mean, it's been 6 months, but at the same time, I think we're all still in the beginning phases of figuring things out. So that's one of the reasons, because they don't necessarily know what they're doing. So, I mean that in the nicest way possible. Sorry. Yeah.
And Erin's going to fix everything.
Be a great leader.
Give me 2 to 3 months.
So if we create a focus for our next meeting that tries to report back on work group needs or work group goals or things that are moving forward with work groups that we might immediately capitalize on, that considers some of the existing RFPs that live in this group that we could start to maybe build from to start moving that ball down the field.
Bless you.
Bless you. Does that feel like, and then also maybe a little bit of polling, like are there questions that we could ask Ellie to include and get funding for that could help us as well? Does that seem like work for the next meeting that is meaningful? Okay. So we'll try to focus on that then maybe for the next meeting.
Love it. And so we have our SNAP WIC marketing meeting on the 25th. So we'll probably, I think we have this on the meeting. Well, how do you guys feel about using our next scheduled meeting as a subcommittee group to continue this discussion? So it'd be like July, I don't know what day it is, the second or third Friday in July. I think it's the 12th, July 12th. Or do you guys think, does that work for you guys? Do you think we need a different meeting? I don't know.
So those who are interested in the SNAP and WIC marketing is meeting on the 25th, and then this group will continue on talking mostly about the campaign.
That's what I'm
That
thinking,
makes
but I
the
would
most
love
sense
to
me
know.
as well, Patty, but I'm interested to hear others' opinions.
And I think what we had suggested in last meeting is that over the summer, so I guess June, July, August, we'd work on these kind of subgroups and then come back together in the fall when we're implementing and sharing with the whole group. And there may be overlap with some of us anyways in some of these meetings, but that's the proposal, I think. Does anyone have any objections to that? Great, awesome. Okay, well, I'm gonna put one more plug in for Erin's survey. So, complete the survey, because it's really important. What's the deadline for that you'd like it to be completed?
So on the email, I put the 17th because I'd love to summarize responses and make some recommendations to the governing council, which is next Friday. So, and not all the questions, there's a lot of questions in the survey. I have a lot of questions. They're not all required. So if it feels overwhelming, like answer the ones that you want to answer and don't answer the rest, that's fine.
Awesome. Okay, if anyone has any questions, we'll be there. Thanks.
Before we leave, I just want to put in one more plug for the SNAP and WIC marketing meeting on the 25th. If you have an interest and or expertise, those are both going to be working meetings. We have invited a very large group of stakeholders from well outside the people who are currently at the table with the blueprint, because we really intend to move this along expeditiously, but also get as much perspective as we can about what we need to do to make the marketing pieces of it successful. So I really urge you to make the trek to Heart with all of us if you can, and lend your time if you can.
Yes. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Bye, Janae, thank you for joining us.